Do you think large groups are now going to be eager to enter into public-private partnerships given the background that they've had within that sector? Forget other sectors for the time being. Within that sector? I don't think
not,
so.
but maybe the lesson is just do business without the government. As the finance minister keeps saying, we know what needs to be done. We just need to go about doing it. So privatization, the energy challenges, the tax policy, the broadening of the taxes, all of these things need to be done. So if you were to choose one policy, say you are the finance minister, you have to choose one policy that you're going to implement in 2025, what would that one policy be?
Okay, so I would start from the other way around. I would say what is the biggest issue that faces Pakistan and forces it to go to the IMF is the balance of payments, right?
Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of All Things Money. I'm your host Fatima Attarwala, and with me today is Ehsaan Malik, the CEO of Pakistan Business Council, the leading policy advocacy body for the business sector. Now, the economy seems to be doing really well. The Pakistan stock market had a phenomenal last year. Bloomberg called it one of the best stock markets of 2024. The government has retired 1.5 trillion in debt, which is a feat for a government known for its borrowing abilities. The current account is in a surplus for 4 months straight. So it would seem that all the indicators are pointing to a strong, robust economy. But is that truly the case? Have there been structural reforms that can sustain this phase, this stabilization phase, and lead it to the growth phase? That is the question that I want to pose today to Sir Ehsaan Malik, who knows all the corporate sectors, all the main tax-paying formal economy in Pakistan. Hello, sir. Welcome to the show.
Okay, Fatima, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you and to be with DawnNews. You have really flattered me. I do not know everything.
You know most of the private sector's challenges, and you have been vital in at least letting the government know what the formal sector needs to grow. And for that, I think your input would be invaluable as to whether the economy is truly doing well or not.
Okay, so the economy is doing significantly better than, let's say, 2 years ago, and even 18 months ago. I think a lot of credit goes to the caretaker government, but also to the current leadership, particularly in the finance ministry, but obviously with the backing of the prime minister and the cabinet. If you consider the series of events that have led to the current stabilization of the economy, you need to take various things into account. The major benefit that the current account has experienced has come about as a result of the tailwinds in the commodity prices.
So basically oil prices are low, so
absolutely
it's easy for the Pakistan economy to stay stable.
So Pakistan is a major importer of oil and even food items like cooking oil, where the pricing is linked to the cost of the fuel, right? Because it can be
because biofuels can be substitutes
into non-edible sort of use also. So that I think is one. The other one is higher remittances. So remittances are about 35-36% up over a full year. That would amount to about $5 or $6 billion, which is a significant addition, right? Now, if I was in government, I would obviously love to take credit for all of that, but we know that there's very limited amount of influence that Pakistan can have on the global fuel prices, and remittances. Obviously, we are benefiting from more people working abroad. The brain drain that is a negative on the local business, but it has gone abroad. That is generating some additional sort of inflows. So that is helping, but I dare say there are non-workers remittances also that are coming back. But the fact that they're coming back is good for the economy overall, right? As far as the stability of the economy is concerned, if you look back over the last 4 or 5 IMF programs on 4 different occasions in the first year or so of every the IMF programs, we've had similar kind of economic stability, right? Only to find that about 18 months later, we forgot that we were ever in trouble, that we ever had a crisis, and we reverted back to our old habits, which then, there was monetary easing, fiscal easing, and which led to import-led demand, and then balance of payment crisis, and then we went back to the IMF, and that's why we are now 24th IMF program, right? So that is something that ought not to happen, right? You mentioned that the stock market is doing well. Well, no doubt it is doing well. It's doing well in rupee terms. It is not doing well in dollar terms, right? Against the 2017 height.
Could you explain that? What do you mean it's not doing well in this dollar terms?
So normally you look at the KSE 100 index, right? So index has definitely gone up against let's say where it was about 14-15 months ago. But if you look back and adjust that index for the depreciation of the rupee, in dollar terms, it is actually lower than where it was at the peak in 2017.
So because the rupee has depreciated so much,
yes,
that the market capitalization does not amount to what it was in the previous
not
peak.
in dollar terms.
Not
right?
in dollar terms.
Number one. Number two, in any case, even if it had done well, PSX or the listed companies do not represent the real economy. There are only 500 listed companies. There are 100 in the KSE index. They represent what, 13-14% of the total GDP. At one time, they were 33-34% of the GDP. When in better times. But currently, that's roughly where we are.
Even in terms of investors, like what, 300,000-400,000 and population of over 240 million.
Yeah, exactly. So I wouldn't take that as alone as a major. But what drives the PSX or what drives the stock market valuations is mood and momentum. Mood is obviously colored by the sentiment. That sentiment is positive. We have to acknowledge that. And the momentum is coming from the diversion of capital from fixed income into equities. As you know, fixed income rates have gone down, right? So obviously that has to find a home, and the only home I guess that's available currently
is the stock market.
The stock market.
Exactly. People either put money in stocks, they buy gold, they buy crypto, they buy real estate, or they put money in fixed income accounts. That is interest rate.
Right.
The interest rate's coming down. Crypto is illegal. Gold is hard to store.
Yes.
Real estate has become really dicey right now because of FBR and everything. So the money is flowing to the stock, and it becomes a cycle, a virtuous cycle. Money flows in, the stock market goes up. More money flows in, stock market goes further up. But does that indicate structural strength, economy structural strength?
No, it doesn't. And one other factor that you need to take account is that if you look at the KSE 100 index, stocks in particular, but generally also, the free float that is available in the market is very limited. So the sponsors still own 75, at least 75%, if not more. There are very few companies that have a float of 25% or greater, right? So the lower the smaller the float, the greater is the money chasing a few shares, right? So supply and demand. So the share prices will go up, and then perhaps they'll go up even more. But you're right. I mean, that is not really a proper index of positive change. So if I was looking at Pakistan from the space, and let's say I would see a sea, and I would see at the surface a lot of calm, right? And that is what the current economic stability is lending us or leading us to believe. Right? There's a lot of calm, but you got to look deep down and see, have any of the fundamental faults been addressed through meaningful reforms? I think it's a start. There's a recognition that needs to happen. Things like privatization need to happen. Unfortunately, PIA privatization was stalled. They're going to come back and retry. Some lessons have been learned, so that would be good. Then energy is not affordable right now, so therefore it's not competitive. It's not only competitive for export markets, versus let's say our eyeball competitors, countries like Bangladesh, for example, but it is also not competitive where there is a good rationale for import substitution either, because imports are when they come in, they've been produced from cheaper energy, right? And I'm referring particularly to energy reliant type of production, right? So energy, I think, is a major issue. Also the fact that our energy is still produced from imported fuel, right? So we haven't really quite shifted to renewables in the way that perhaps we should have done. And one of the major reasons is that we don't have the adequate transmission lines from south to north. We produce from wind power, renewable energy in the south, but we are unable to take it to the major points of consumption, which are really up north, right? So energy would be one of the major ones. Then I think the other major reforms that are required are in the broadening of the tax base. What we have today is deepening of the tax base, which means that the people who are already paying tax, it's easier to go back because you know who they are. It's easier to.
It's you and I. We are the ones who are paying the salaries and the indirect taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. So the salary, I mean, we did some analysis, and for like, adjusted for exchange rate, in Pakistan, the salaried people pay between 1.5 to 3.5 times as much tax as Indian salaried people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and for, I dare say, no additional benefit that we get out of paying those taxes.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that in India they get a huge amount of benefit either, but certainly I don't think
1.5 to 3 times is a huge amount.
To 3.5 times, yeah, depending on where you happen to be in the slab, right? So that is a cause for concern, particularly for the formal sector, not just because people leave and they go abroad, but people leave the formal sector and find jobs in the informal sector because they can get paid under the table, which obviously the formal sector will not do, right?
In fact, increasing taxes decreases the overall tax collection because more people are incentivized towards the informal sector.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Yeah. So there are certain fundamental issues to contend with when it comes to fiscal policy. I think one major issue that we have is the fiscal policy currently is made by the tax collector called FBR, right? If I was FBR and I was given a tough target, I would change the policy, right, to suit my target ambition, right? And then hopefully I would be able to deliver the target. And unfortunately, that is how in the past, at least, or even until now, that is how the targets have been delivered to the extent that they've been delivered. Right now, of course, we are struggling with the current year's target, but that's how it is. So one thing that needs to happen is that you need to separate fiscal policy making from the collection of taxes. Fiscal policy should not be made by FBR. It should be made by an independent body, whatever name you want to give it, policy board. It can be under the direction of the Ministry of Finance, but it should have representation from taxpayers. It should also have representation, a meaningful representation at the very senior level from other ministries. Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Industries, the BOI, from an investment point of view, Ministry of Commerce from a trade point of view. And the reason why I'm saying that is your fiscal policy has to be aligned with all these policies, because the fiscal policy has to be medium to long term. It cannot be this year's target and next year's target, because if that is the way, then you have super tax and you have this tax and you have that tax. You'll get some way or the other, you'll come close to meeting your targets, but you are jeopardizing your longer term investment. We know that the rate of investment in Pakistan is half that of India and Bangladesh, and their investment rates are not, they're not as high as they ought to be there too. So why are people not investing? Yeah, people if you are a foreign investor, you would not want to come to a country and pay more taxes if you can take that investment somewhere else and produce the goods that you wanted to produce in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, or wherever, right?
We keep talking about foreign investors in FDI, but then there's also the argument comes up that the family businesses, they themselves are not investing in Pakistan. So sometimes when I talk to ADB officials and all, like, if you do not have your own investors, your Pakistani investors believing in the economy, how do you intend to incentivize foreigners?
Absolutely. So I can switch that a little bit and say, if your policy framework is pursuing FDI for the sake of just getting money in, irrespective of the fact that over a period of time, or a relatively short period of time, you will actually take out more in terms of profit, in terms of imports, etc.
Especially since FDI is consumer oriented. We have shampoos and baby powders and whatnot, but we do not have actual manufacturing.
So bulk of the investment in the FMCG sector is really chasing the demographic dividend of Pakistan.
Exactly.
The fact that we have a high growth rate of population, 2.5, 2.6%, rapidly urbanizing, which in combination, the high rate of growth of population and rapid urbanization is actually really a vicious combination, because it puts a lot of pressure on the urban infrastructure, which is in any case poor, particularly when you talk of Karachi. Lahore is a bit better, but most of the big cities don't have that kind of thing. It is leading to encroachment of agricultural land, etc., etc. So, but when people move from rural areas to urban areas, they generally move away from consuming products that are sold from the sack, whether it's tea or flour, into packed products, etc. And that's where the FMCG world makes money, right? But your FDI, into consumer product companies, and I, by the way, worked for one of the larger ones for 24 years. So we know from sort of close experience that not only is it the dividends that go abroad, which I think they have every right, if you invest in.
Obviously,
whether
if
you are a local or foreign investor,
in fact, if you are attracting investment and you're not letting money flow back, profit repatriation, if there's no profit repatriation, no FDI is coming in for anything.
Yes.
So we're not saying that.
No. So that's right. But if you are producing goods, not for export but for domestic market, and in the production of goods you're using a high element of imports, which, by the way, most of the FMCG products unfortunately do, right? There are very few that rely on the local agriculture and other inputs, and there are some companies that say that they've taken their reliance on indigenized inputs from 10% to 70%, but what they mean is they're not directly importing those goods, but they're allowing somebody else to import the goods and then supply to them. That's misleading, right?
Okay.
So your pressure on your external account is still there. So instead of attracting that kind of FDI, you've actually got to go for export-oriented FDI, right? But coming back to your earlier point, you've got to first incentivize your local investors, whether they are foreign investors or local investors. Because if I'm sitting in London or I'm sitting in New York or wherever I am, right, I will pick up a phone and call an American company or a UK company operating in Pakistan and say, what's your experience? And if you hear things like remittances are not being allowed, or work permits are not being permitted, or there is an import crunch that is significantly impacting our business, or worse still, the security considerations, then you're not going to be coming to Pakistan, right? So there, our policy framework has to really safeguard the interest of the existing investors, and equally, why should foreign investors come here when local investors are shy of investment? So the question is, why are local investors shy of investment? So the recent extrajudicial treatment of the IPPs,
yes,
and most of the IPPs really, the investment into power production was done by the large local groups. Yeah. Now, their primary businesses may have been in cement or textiles or automobiles or whatever, yeah, but they also went in there because they were offered a set of policies which were very attractive. And the reason that the government offered them at that time was because they thought that would incentivize, and that worked, right? But a few years later, you find that the sovereign guarantees do not apply to local investors, by the way. The Chinese have not been touched so far, yeah. There's another foreign investment also into power plant, but that has been left alone, right? For perhaps good reasons. But the point is, does that then augur well? Does that then create a positive sentiment for those large groups to come back and invest into other sectors?
Fair enough. With a gun on the head, the IPPs were forced to renegotiate the deal. But then again, there was a lot of inefficiency there. They had a captain market and they were really making profit out of it. So what would have been the solution then, if not this?
So I mean, everybody is not inefficient. You can't sweep with a very broad broom. You should have been more selective, and you should have differentiated between the responsible investors, people who are not misleading, people who have not over invoiced, people who are not misreporting their yield factors, etc. From those that are, right? But because this was all done in a hurry, everybody was treated equally badly or well, right?
Okay.
So the outcome is not positive from that point of view. What do we need? I mean, remaining within the energy sector, we need public-private partnerships in the distribution, the discos, right? Do you think large groups are now going to be eager to enter into public-private partnerships, given the background that they've had within that sector? Forget other sectors for the time, within that sector. I don't
Obviously
think
not,
so.
but maybe the lesson is just do business without the government. I know it's very
Yeah.
difficult, but we have the sports goods, we have the maize
Yes,
industry.
yes.
The industries that have done well without government intervention or
Yeah.
without government support have actually done well.
Okay,
IT
so
sector is another one.
you're absolutely right, and at least certainly I and the PBC and PBC in general really believes that the future of investment or the future of this business cannot be reliant upon a government which is itself struggling for solvency, number one. You cannot rely on guaranteed returns. You should never have in the first place, but fine. You should not in future. You cannot rely on protection forever. There are some sectors that have been protected for a long time, and we've seen that ultimately it is the local consumer whose value is jeopardized. Yeah? So you can have limited time protection to allow certain sectors to build scale where there is a competitive advantage to produce those goods in Pakistan, but to have a blanket, unconditional and not indefinite type of protection, that's simply not on, right? So yes, to be fair, we always point fingers at the government and say that the policies are not right. I think we have to also look at ourselves. Has to be introspection, particularly with the larger groups, and say, have we become risk averse? Have we become too conditioned to not taking risk, too complacent, to making relatively easier money, and that applies equally to banks, by the way, because banks probably did not need to have a
absolutely.
a
They
risk
lent
evaluation.
to the government and they did not lend to the private sector, because why should they when they can make so much money off the government?
Exactly.
Their profits skyrocket 8-9 times. Some of the banks. So they are one of the reasons why the stock market did so well.
Right. But now that avenue is not going to be that open or significantly reduced, they would perforce have to go and look at certain sectors which they never did, right? And they didn't need to in the past, because you rightly said bulk of their money was going to a risk-free sovereign. But they ought to also remember that if IPPs can be related, there was a sovereign guarantee. Can they continue to rely? Now, I'm not suggesting that there will be restructuring of government, and I don't think there is any need right now. But yes, carried to its logical argument, there could be that could have been a consequence. So thank God that wasn't a consequence, and our banking sector did not get jeopardized as a result of that. But yes, in the future, the banks should keep a watch out for that.
That is very ominous for the banks.
Yeah, it is. So they have to then smarten up and look at the sectors where they can take risks. And there are lots of sectors where they ought to be taking risk. I mean, there are very few banks, for example, that are working in the agricultural field, that are lending to the SMEs. A lot of the banks find it easier to lend to the multinationals or perhaps to the large local corporates. Yeah? They need to now go to the next frontier, which is the next the companies that don't belong to groups, but companies that are otherwise doing well. They also have to learn to take risks based on cash flow as opposed to physical collateral, because everybody doesn't own land or buildings that they can collateralize.
So usually the argument from the banks is that yes, cash flow, but then we are talking about SMEs, and we just do not have the manpower to be able to vet all the accounts that are
but the
necessary.
manpower has to be created.
Yeah.
But before you create the manpower, you have to have the will and then the stamina and the desire to do that.
And if you have so much profit coming in from the government, why should you have that?
Yeah.
will?
So previously you didn't, right? In future, I guess you need to be able to take those risks, evaluate them, take them, manage those risks.
And now we are going into financial inclusion, and that has always been a challenge for the country.
Yeah.
Especially when you compare it to peer countries.
Right.
Women account holders or the impoverished or somebody who doesn't have a CNIC, for example, and there are so many who do not. But coming back to the corporate sector, we've talked about energy a lot. One thing that especially the textile sector says a lot is a level playing field. Without subsidized energy rates, they cannot compete with, say, India or Vietnam or China. So what would you say about that?
Okay, so you're probably familiar that currently the weaving and the spinning industry is almost like working at 10-20% capacity. And the reason why they can't compete is because of the high energy costs. With that part of the textile complex is very energy reliant, right? And the energy being where it is. So where is the yarn coming from, and where is the fabric coming from? it is being imported by the larger composite textile exporters, right? So when you import, you can import from a source where the energy rates are lower, and otherwise, I mean, they can provide the quality and meet your service standards in terms of supplies, etc. So there's a shift now from local reliance of yarn, reliance on locally produced yarn to imported yarn, right? And your goods are being made, apparel is being made, or those yarn is being converted into cloth and then eventually to apparel, and the exports are going ahead, right? So that does not augur well for your local weaving and spinning, industry. So that I think needs to be addressed. And now we are hearing that the Minister of Power is about to announce radically lower energy tariffs. Industry is actually caught up in a dilemma. Industry does not only pay for the cost of production of the power, but it also pays for all the inefficiencies, and it also subsidizes domestic consumption, right? So when you do that, the policymakers fail to take account of the positive impact that greater employment would do if industry was provided competitive inputs, particularly energy. I think that is a realization that is, I think, coming through, because suddenly you're not going to find 15, 16 rupees cheaper energy, because somebody is now taking a call and saying we will have to absorb that 15, 16 or whatever rupees and allow energy at a cheaper and a more competitive rate to industry. So I think that is really likely the solution, because the amount of money that you're likely to get from renegotiating the IPPs is only 1.5, 2 rupees. With the tax impact maybe it's 3 rupees per unit. So that's not a significant this extrajudicial rearrangement of the terms is not going to lead to significant reduction. It's other factors that are going to lead to meaningful reduction in the energy cost.
Yes, there's a very solid argument for giving subsidized energy, especially to sectors like weaving and spinning that are essential inputs for our main textile sector. But then again, subsidized energy, circulate debt, we are stuck in the same cycle that we were. So how is this a step forward?
No, but Mahatma, I disagree. We're not talking about subsidized energy to anyone, right? We are saying energy at a competitive cost with your eyeball competitors, right? So if you've got inefficiencies or you've got theft, you've got to be able to control that and address that, right? That is not a genuine cost. It's a inflation of cost based on your inability to go and correct those faults. Those are fundamental flaws that are in the energy sector, right? So if you take the actual cost of production of electricity and compare it with the final price per unit, it is not significant. It's about 7 or 8 rupees per unit as compared to the nearly 60 rupees that are charged for the price. So if you take a 7 or 8 rupees and add in 2 or 3 or 4 rupees for the transmission, you ought to be able to supply them technically for 10 rupees, 11 rupees. But okay, let's say not 10, 11 rupees, you could do it at 15, 20 rupees, right? At 15, 20 rupees, convert that into cents per kilowatt, you'd actually have cheaper electricity than you have in Bangladesh. Yeah. So the term subsidy is a missed description of this. Yeah. What you're saying is, okay, so we are not going to encumber the industrial user with all the costs of our inefficiency.
Who will be bearing the cost of inefficiency then? Somebody has to, because the inefficiencies are not being addressed.
Yeah, so you need to address the inefficiencies.
Yes. While the inefficiencies are not being addressed, during that time, and they get a competitive rate, so who bears the cost? Somebody has to, right?
It's a chicken and egg argument,
exactly.
Right? Yeah. So, but you have to then decide order of priorities: employment, exports. Where do they rank? Yeah. If they rank high, which in my opinion they should, or they do, or they ought to do, right? Then you've got to find the means to give industry energy at a competitive rate.
Yeah. What are those means? Pakistan's transmission and distribution are like what, 20%, over 20%, they are among the highest in the world. But you have the kundas and you have the broken lines and you have a very outdated infrastructure. So are there any movements being done, any intention to fix that?
Yeah, so this whole thrust towards public-private partnerships is a move towards that direction.
We seem
They're
to be in a
saying-
circular
yeah.
argument as to why
So
again
no,
private
I
sector
get-
wouldn't want to be there.
No, fine. Let's assume the private sector would want to be
Okay.
there, right? Because there are all types of people in the private sector, right? So let's say there are, maybe the larger groups may or may not be, but maybe there are people who are very familiar with the local environment in a particular area where the disco operates, etc., and they know they have the wherewithal to go and deal with kundas and so
Fair
on and so
enough.
forth. Yeah. So if they are, then they ought to. We have to move forward with that, right? I mean, we keep talking about it, but has any disco been privatized?
Coming back to privatization, PIA was a fiasco. We have a disco. So we have a privatization challenge in Pakistan. Why is that?
Yeah, I think.
Does nobody want to buy anything that the
No,
state is
I
selling?
think first of all, the mindset has always been that even if you think you've done a good deal, it can always be challenged, and you can have the National Accountability Bureau coming after you, etc. Maybe that's a thing of the past a little bit now. One doesn't hear of that, but that was the mindset that the Privatization Commission used to have in its mind. Let's have a watertight, make sure that we extract the maximum possible from the buyer, and so on and so forth. So that's the mindset, right? But PIA was I think was a faulty sort of packaging of the organization in terms of the bidding process, right? You can't hope to sell a
Highly indebted
exactly,
entity.
30, 40, 50 billion negative equity, company, and also then place other conditions like you won't be able to rationalize the workforce, you won't be able to change the CEO. These things. I mean, when somebody's putting their own money, they need to have total flexibility. They need to be able to right size. They need to have the top leadership, from wherever they want to get. And if they're buying a net negative equity company, you don't expect them to pay a huge amount of money to buy that. Nobody would, right?
Why would they? Yeah.
So hopefully those things have been addressed. I think they've gone back to the previous bidders and heard them out, and heard why they did not pursue the bids. So maybe they'll get it right now. So I
As the finance minister keeps saying, we know what needs to be done. We just need to go about doing it. So privatization, the energy challenges, the tax policy, the broadening of the taxes, all of these things need to be done. We know it. We've known it for decades.
Yeah.
So if you were to choose one policy, say you are the finance minister, you have to choose one policy that you're going to implement in 2025. What would that one policy be?
Okay, so I would start from the other way around. I would say what is the biggest issue that faces Pakistan and forces it to go to the IMF is the balance of payments, right? Your external account becomes a net deficit, then you have to borrow money, etc., right? So I would say, if I can't get everything else right, let me get exports right, because exports is the most sustainable way to manage your external account and therefore the economy, right? I would then really primarily focus on that, since you said only one thing, right?
Yeah.
I would focus, and then I would say, where I'm the finance minister, I have an influence over the budget. Even in the reformed fiscal policy, I would have a greater say. Yeah, I now want to have a fiscal policy that would actually help more people to export. People who've never exported, I will give them a small incentive. I mean, it doesn't have to be a huge incentive. To, let's say you're one of those foreign FMCG companies that don't export at all, but you make good quality products locally, right? I would give you an incentive. I would say, well, look, if you get 15 or 20% of your total turnover, I mean, you're able to export. For the amount of money that you earn out of exports, I would maybe charge you 1 or 2% lower tax than I charge you on the domestic, directionally, right? I would equally go to such a company that is heavily import reliant. It doesn't have to be a foreign company. I'd say, if you can indigenize your direct and indirect imports into, indigenize, avoid importing, to an extent of 15-20%, I will give you some incentive. Yeah. So I would give incentives to manage the external account. I think if I was only going to do one thing, that is what I would do. Of course, then the other major issue, if you allow me two things to do, because they are interlinked, right? The other thing that deficit that we face, maybe have faced deficit on the external account, we also have faced and still face deficits on the fiscal account. Yeah, those are the two accounts. There's a third major deficit that we have, which we'll talk about later, which is the trust deficit, but we'll come to that later. So on the fiscal account, what I would do is I would say that let me broaden the tax base, but equally let me also cut back on the unnecessary expenditure, and let me also pass on some of the responsibilities to the provinces, which I understand as a result of, whether it was a result of IMF or otherwise, the provinces are now willing to listen. So we're not talking about renegotiating the financial award, etc. We're using good terms like a new fiscal accord, yeah, where some of the burden of, for example, your social safety net, your public sector development program, that can be undertaken, if not entirely, but partly by the provinces, where the impact is also the greatest, right? And would be even greater if that money was allowed to go down to the local governments, which unfortunately we are not currently configured to do. Or provinces are not, but they ought to. Yeah. So I would say let me do that. Of course, I would also encourage the provinces to raise agriculture tax, collect agriculture tax is the right term, because agriculture tax is there, but it's not collected, and also collect the right amount of property tax and use that to develop and manage their own provincial sort of economies. Yeah. So that would actually alleviate pressure on the federal government. So reduce the rate of the amount of money that you need to borrow. When that happens, when the fiscal deficit gets managed, then inflation also gets managed. So the people of Pakistan also benefit. So I would those are the two things I would do. But the third deficit is, I think, the most significant deficit, and that's the trust deficit. You look at any of the stakeholders, do they trust each other? I mean, the political parties, I guess, were not configured to trust each other. You can have a coalition, a loose coalition or tight coalition, whatever, but that trust, I think, is weak. Yeah. But of course, between the opposition and the government, obviously there is always a little bit of tension, some healthy tension, but also some unhealthy tension. Does the FBR and the government trust business, particularly big business? Honest answer, no. Does the big business in particular, or any business, trust the FBR or the taxman? No. Do even salaried people trust? So trust is very weak in Pakistan, and that's not, I mean, there's nothing overnight that you can do about it. Yeah? It's just one of the slow things that need to happen. If you look at our parliament, 60% of the people in the parliament are from rural areas. Do they have the same amount of incentive to broaden the tax base as people who are salaried, etc.? And therefore, do the salaried people trust our people who are sitting in parliament? I guess not, right? So I think that is the third sort of dimension that needs to be taken account of.
The three things you mentioned: increase exports, have the provinces carry some of the more expenses, and then address the trust deficit. Yes, of course, increase exports. We have LSM contracting. So any structural improvement, if that doesn't help LSM, it doesn't improve exports, will not pull the economy out. But again, exports increase, imports increase. There's always that. And the proportion by which imports increase is higher than the proportion by which exports increase. That's what started the mess in the first place. We do have FMCGs exporting. Dipit was here earlier. Completely local brand, has started exporting. Very tiny, yes.
But good.
If somebody small, tiny, from Shan can just come and go do it, then the bigger companies can obviously do it as well. But they have no incentive to do so when they have such a big consumer market. So that's one thing. The other thing is the provinces are required to give a surplus. They have most of the time they are fighting that we are not getting the money that we were promised, especially the KP and Balochistan. So for them to undertake higher expenses from the federal government, it's not something that anybody is going to agree
but they can also generate more revenue from agriculture, from property.
Agriculture income tax is has become such a controversial topic. And as you said, as a salaried class, I see feudals sitting in the government. Why would they want to tax themselves more?
Sure. But they have to at some point.
They have to. They have to. But it's not something you and I can do. It's something that only the IMF can push them into. But the IMF doesn't do prescribe, you increase, if IMF says increase taxes, and then that's us.
Yes. Okay.
So where's the trust deficit is there, very much there.
So we've been talking about what the government can do, etc. Let's change the sort of angle or the lens, right? what can the private sector do to export more,
Yes,
right?
yes. That would be
Okay, so we have very weak branding there. The kind of brands that are known abroad is the Shans and the Nationals. They are primarily, focused on the diaspora. Yeah, so it's good. They're doing a good job, but it's primarily diaspora focused. I mean, I can't think of a brand, or maybe if you can, help me here, that is not, targeted at the diaspora, but is really popular amongst, let's say, people who live in UK. I'm not talking about diaspora now. Yeah? A Pakistani brand that is known, right? Very few, if there are any.
Footballs.
Yeah, footballs is a brand called Adidas. That's not Pakistani.
No. The footballs that we make for them.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that we
Okay,
have.
so you hit on it. So we can make the product, but we can't brand it.
We
right?
cannot brand
so
it, yes.
we rely on somebody else to brand. I mean, that's a story for our surgical instruments, right?
Yes,
We
I
make
was thinking
the
of
basic surgical instrument, we send it to Germany, they polish it, they package it, they put their own brand name, and they charge 5 times as much. Yeah.
So investments in branding and marketing would be much less than, say, setting up a new solar system power plant.
Yeah.
So I mean, why
No,
are those investments not taking
but
place?
because most of these companies or businesses are family owned, their background is engineering and manufacturing. They do not have enough understanding of marketing. Making a pitch for people who do. You can see that.
Basmati rice in particular is something that keeps coming up in the same way, that
Yeah.
it's not marketed well.
Yeah. So it's not always packaged. It's not always marketed, and some of it gets marketed as Indian brands. Yeah, but it's actually Pakistani. But because that brand sells, right? So whoever does it, wherever they do it, they're maximizing their profit as a result of that. So that, but going back to the government, our free trade agreements or our trade agreements have been very poorly negotiated, right?
Yes.
Particularly the one with China.
Yes, absolutely.
Often, but parking China for the time being, if you look at some of the other free trade agreements, we go because we say friendly, brotherly country. When you start with friendly, brotherly country as your motivator for a trade agreement, you're not going to get the best terms, right? The other country is not using those terms at all. China, for example, we renegotiated a free trade agreement, yeah? And on paper, 45% of our goods currently can go duty-free to China under that free trade agreement. But look deeper, you take out the stuff that we can't make or don't make, well, I shouldn't say can't make, we don't make, or stuff that China simply does not import because they either make it themselves or whatever, right? They don't need it perhaps, right? That 45% drops down to about 14%. So we've done better than we pre-negotiation trade agreement, but it's not like hitting the headlines. By 2030, they say you can have 75% of your goods going. Again, adjusted for the two factors that I just mentioned, that will fall down to 24%. Bangladesh, without any free trade agreement, can sell 96% of what it makes to China free of duty. Yeah. Okay, they have had that LDC advantage, etc. But the LDC advantage will go away. But China will still continue to rely or give them that 96%. So our economic diplomacy has been weak. And that actually then brings us back to the fragmentation that we have in our policy making and in the federal government, but also between the federation and the provinces. The Ministry of Commerce works independently of the Ministry of Industries, of the Ministry of Investment, of the FBR. FBR is all on its own. They just want to maximize revenue. So there has to be somebody who has to bring it all together. Usually it's the Prime Minister. Yeah. So the Prime Minister has to bring all of them together and say, look, our ultimate objective is only going to be achieved if all of you are on the same plane. All your policies are aligned. They should actually take everybody's policies and get someone and pay a consultant, pay McKinsey or whoever you want to pay, BCG, yeah, and say, is there good alignment between these policies? Yeah, because I can tell you there's a very little alignment. If there was good alignment between these policies, then everything would be working in the same direction. Your market access would be better because your Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Commerce, and they appoint the trade and investment counselors abroad. They would be actively working towards a certain end, lobbying for better access into various markets, etc. So those kind of things are missing. But I think an onus is really on the businesses and the private sector to get their act together also. Yeah, so you can't always keep pointing fingers at the government. And one of the reasons why PBC was formed, aside from the fact that there are lots of things that we can take to the government, the whole laundry list, we also wanted our own members, but not necessarily our members, but business in general also to reflect on some of the weaknesses that we have in our own competitiveness. So if you look at over the 250 studies that we've done over the last many years, right, since 2007 or 8 when we really started this process, a lot of them are on competitiveness of different sectors. Yeah, of course we do talk about the policy framework, where the policy framework can be better, but we also ask the industry associations or the people in those sectors to get smarter. Why is it that Bangladesh is able to export goods at a higher price than we do, but in greater quantity than we do? They must be doing something better. So therefore they're adding that value which we're not able to add, right? So these are the kind of things that our private sector really needs to look at. And then why are we not able to broaden our export basket? Some of that is because we have very poor integration between the SMEs and the final exporters. Yeah? Our SMEs are very weak. A lot of them are in the semi-formal sector. Some of the business is informal, some of it is formal. You can't be an exporter if you're in the informal sector. So those people are not, and they can't even go to banks and borrow money, or banks are reluctant to give them money. So underfunded SMEs, partly formal, partly informal, is not a recipe for success for either employment or exports. That needs to be brought together, and that fragmentation needs to be handled.
So if we were to just sum up the major problems, those we know, we need to privatize, we need to fix the energy losses, we need to the transmission and dismission losses, we need to broaden the tax base. All of these have been said time and again. But I think from this discussion, the main short-term, medium-term solutions that can be implemented in 2025 are just market the goods that we have, like basmati, right, or surgical instruments. Doesn't cost a lot, doesn't cost billions of dollars, but that is something that can happen this year, and that can establish brands for years more. That's one thing. The other thing is better alignment. Better alignment within the ministries, better alignment within the informal and the formal sector, better alignment between SMEs and the exporters. And lastly, and perhaps more importantly, the private sector needs to get its act together.
Take risks.
Take risk, be more competitive, look inwards to see how they can proceed and earn and grow without government support, without subsidies, without focusing their efforts on getting more from the government. Thank you so much for coming on my show. So this was a very interesting discussion, and I hope that the private sector takes up on the solutions that you have.
It was a great pleasure being with you, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about things that ought to happen.
Ought to happen, yeah. Thank you so much, sir. So today on the show we had Ehsaan Malik, the CEO of the Pakistan Business Council. The Pakistan Business Council represents over 100 companies in Pakistan, and that's not just somebody who is importing and selling. Companies that have invested in Pakistan, over 18, 19, about roughly 20 sectors. So the point is, what can corporate Pakistan do to make the economy stronger? What can the private sector do to make the economy stronger? We know the problems. We know that we need to privatize. We know we need to broaden the tax base. But then there's also the onus on the private sector as to what it can do independent of the government to increase its competitiveness. At the same time, what can the government do other than provide subsidies to improve the business environment for the private sector to flourish? And that is the conversation that we had today with Ehsaan Malik.